Hello.
Hello. I mean, I think that you're someone who a lot of people will be familiar with, but if you don't know, Michael Brough, described as strange wild creature, eclectic game developer, and actual wizard, which I gotta say, I think you're embodying right now. So, yeah, kicking it off with a real wizard. So I think that then I will hand it off to you to talk about the possibility of rogue elements.
Yeah, my slides go, and how do we do this? I've lost it. Here we go. Share, tab, this one. Here we go. Is this working? Is this sharing? Everything okay? I'm not hearing anything in response.
We're good. We're good. I'll come on and tell you you're good.
You're telling me we're good.
Got the slides
Okay,
up. We're good.
Okay.
Take it away.
So I'm going to talk about some aspects of the game Rogue, a very old game that we all have some familiarity with. And then I'll talk interleave with that a little bit about how I've adapted some ideas that are in Rogue into my own games. And yeah, that's my basic idea. So the core mechanic of Rogue is that you press direction keys, explore a dungeon, and fight monsters. And what I think is a quite clever idea that I'm looking at it from the modern perspective. Like this maybe seems quite obvious because we've played 100 games that use this idea, but coming at it from the other side, I back before I was born, I wonder how big an idea was it to have the same input keys both move and attack, because they're very different actions. And when you're thinking about how am I going to make this new thing a video game and incorporate a kind of fantasy adventure, I'm not sure if this level of abstraction is so obvious. Okay, so yeah, what happens? You press a key, and if there's nothing there, then you move. If there's something there, you hit it. And yeah, I just think this is just a really nice, simple basis to build a game on. I'm really emphasizing how simple it is, because roguelikes don't always have a reputation for being elegant and simple, and I think that's wrong. Like this is a really cute idea, and yeah, there's something that happens later in the game that's quite cool. You run into an enemy that you can't see, and it appears to you as though it's just an empty space. And so when you attempt to press a direction key towards that space, instead of moving into that space, you attack. And I've written here also the potion of blindness makes all enemies invisible here. And so previously the controls were unambiguous. There's an exclusion between spaces with enemies in them and spaces without. But this breaks that, and it becomes unclear what the outcome of a given direction key will be. And this is really weird. If I told you in advance, here's a video game in which you choose what direction to perform actions in, but you don't get to choose what actions they are, the game decides for you, you'd feel like that was almost unplayable. But how it actually is in the context of the game after you've already accepted the idea that moving and attacking are kind of equivalent because they're on the same keys, it just feels completely natural. I just like to try and see this from the outside as though it was a weird thing, even though when you play it, it feels natural. More Travis, you should play it. It's fucking great. This is my first time giving a video talk, and I'm just trying to get my head around. I'm sure several other people have this experience before too. Okay, yeah. So, yeah, I think that's a really nice twist that it has. And yeah, but basically the idea of moving and attacking with the same keys is quite cute, enables a bunch of possibilities. And as a game designer, when I run into a cool idea, I try to think, what more can I do with this? And so here's a couple of variations on the idea. My game 868 Hack. So Rogue has a ranged attack. You can throw items at an enemy, but you do that by pressing T to throw, selecting the direction, selecting the item. And that's instead of moving or attacking for your turn. In my game 868 Hack, the attack unified with the movement controls is a ranged attack. So if you attempt to make a ranged attack in a direction that there's an enemy, if you attempt to, if you swipe a direction key, if you press a direction key in a direction that there's an enemy, which you would naturally feel as moving in that direction, instead you make a ranged attack. And you stay in one spot, just as in Rogue, you stay in one spot when making a melee attack. And so this doesn't make physical sense. Like, there's a space there and you can't move into it because attempting to move into it instead attacks. But the game is set in a glitchy cyberspace world, so it's actually in keeping with the theming of the game that it doesn't make physical sense. So I'm quite proud of that. I feel like it's a nice twist on the original Rogue idea. And another game that has a variation on this is Nightmare Cooperative by Lucky Frame, in which one player controls a party of multiple characters with one set of direction keys. When you press left, all your characters on the screen do left. In the Rogue sense, either they move left if there's an empty space, or they attack left if there's an enemy. And again, this works because movement and combat are on the same set of controls. If you had to press attack and choose a direction, often what would happen is 3 of your party would be attacking empty space just for one to attack. But instead, you can have them synergistically doing different moves, different actions with the same inputs. One of them can be attacking an enemy, while the other one's moving towards the exit, and the other one is picking up a treasure there. So that's quite cute. I like that game. My game Imbroglio has a little bit of that as well. There's one item that can control enemies, but I've used as the example here their game because it's the whole game, and that's quite cool. And I'm pretty sure Baba Is You does things like this too. It's really quite cool. So I'm sure there's other variations we could invent on this concept, and that would be fun. And also there's obviously a lot we can do in roguelikes with just taking Rogue's movement and layering other things on top. And yeah, roguelikes, they're great. Okay, what else does Rogue have? Rogue has items. It's compared to NetHack, ADOM, Angband, the later big roguelikes, it's a fairly small game. It's fairly simple. It just has moving, attacking, and using items. So your character progression is leveling up and getting more items. And some items you equip for stat bonuses. Some items are activated to change the combat situation. Basically, if because combat is just move into an enemy space to attack it, there's not a lot of I want to say there's not a lot of subtlety. That's not quite right. There's not a lot of different. The outcome is mostly determined by the rolls. That's what I want to say. You hit, they hit, you hit, they hit. If the rolls go well or your stats are stronger, you're going to win. If their stats are stronger, then they might kill you, and you need an out to do something different. You can run away. That sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. And usable items gives you an alternative. And that's pretty important to all roguelikes, I think, to have a limited resource that you can use to make a variation to a combat situation. If you could do it all the time, well, some you can. Oh, there's so many possibilities. Okay, rogue. Stick with rogue. So I'm going to talk about a few like very specific items in rogue, and I'm not really going to talk about the specific items. What I'm trying to get at, the heart of it, is like sort of game design concepts, but I'm going to use as examples like very specific items. So the Wand of Cold is a wand. So wands in Rogue, you activate them by pressing Z to zap them, choose a direction with a direction key, which how you're going to aim it, and choose the item. So it's very simple aim, point and fire, and it deals damage to enemies for 6 spaces in a row, unless they're a Yeti. And like I really like this. It's flavorful. It makes sense. The Yeti presumably originates from the Alps. It's adapted to a cold environment, so the Wand of Cold doesn't hurt it. And like a lot of modern games use the style of having like a elemental damage system, where you might have the one does a frost attack, and the Yeti has 80% frost resistance, and you have boots of 2% frost resistance, and like that's absolutely a type of system that you can get a lot of gameplay out of. But I think it's really special how Rogue does it. It just has one special case exception. This wand doesn't hurt this Yeti, and the whole narrative of, oh, it's because it's a cold attack, it's because like that all happens in your head. Like this is Rogue's like unique design style, to just have individual exceptions like this. And to me, this feels like this gives it a character of magic. When you build a magic system for a game that is really logical and coherent and like systematic, it often isn't magic anymore. It's just a system. It just feels like a science. And Rogue like avoids that. It just has a lot of one-off exceptions like this. And I think part of why a lot of games use this, the like generalized magic system style, is because that's what we're taught as a good style of software engineering, to construct good extensible systems, not one-off exceptions. And that absolutely is a good software engineering advice, but our game designs don't have to directly reflect how we program them. So like our designs don't have to be limited by our software engineering style. So yeah, magic is in the exceptions. And usually the sweet spot is that you need to have a few things that follow a rule to establish a rule, and just one thing that's an exception to the rule. Once you have more than one exception, your mind automatically establishes a more general rule. And yeah, when there's just one exception, often we can stop that rule establishing part of the brain from working and just go, oh yeah, it just is special. Yeah, that's how I think about it. Like, yeah. Okay. So having these items that target a specific enemy type works well with Rogue, because Rogue has relatively few enemy types. There's one for each letter of the alphabet, I believe. And in a larger game where there's, say, several hundred enemy types, a wand that just doesn't affect this enemy type would just wouldn't come up most of the time. You wouldn't even notice it. It would be a rule that doesn't make sense to have in there. So for larger games, a more systematic structure is often really the right choice. My own games, I've mostly gone in the other direction, and I have very few enemy types. I like really small numbers and like dense interactions. And so I've been able to have these types of effects be a larger part of the game. So, for example, 868 Hack has just 4 enemy types, and there's an ability that damages all enemies of the virus type on the screen. On average, that's a quarter of all enemies, but situationally it can be even more. So that's something that's a similar character to this one doesn't affect this type, but a more integral part of the game. And similarly, yeah, Syncopath has a bunch of wands that just kill an enemy of this type. And in Rogue, like, maybe a dragon killing wand would be great, a Jabberwock killing wand, but like it would be pretty niche. Yeah, so I think that's all I have to say about this one. Okay, move on. Quaffle potion. Okay, the next item I want to talk about is the scroll of teleport. And what this does, you read it, R to read, L to choose the scroll, and it instantly moves your hero to a random space anywhere on the current level that's not currently occupied by another creature. And then that's the end of your turn, the enemy's move. This is presumably inspired by the teleport spell in Dungeons and Dragons, but Dungeons and Dragons teleport is about travel. You set a destination, and maybe there's some dice rolls on the way to where you get there, but it's about going somewhere. And for Rogue to have a teleport like that, you would need an extra input prompt. Okay, you're teleporting, select a space on the level where you want to go to. And the designers chose to keep the items relatively simple. Later roguelikes sometimes have prompts like this, but in Rogue, all items, so wands, you pick a direction and they do their thing. Scrolls and potions, you just select to use the item and it does its thing. So it's, again, like, it's interface simplicity. There's they've chosen the effects of the items to not require any further input. And this is essentially the same ability as the hyperspace button in Space War, which you press it. So Space War, if you don't know, is arguably the very first video game. So you press the hyperspace button to pop out of the screen and pop in somewhere else randomly. So yeah, random teleport feels like a very quintessentially video gamey effect. Yeah, and I really like it because it's not intrinsically a beneficial or harmful effect. Rogue has unidentified items, and they're risky to try out and figure out what they are, because mixed in with them, some of them are bad. There's a scroll of fire, which just blows up in your face and hurts you. But the scroll of teleport isn't intrinsically good or bad, because it just moves you to a different situation. Some positions are good to be in, some positions are bad to be in. Randomizing your position, who knows? But in practice, it's usually a good item, because you once you've identified it, you make a decision about how to use it. And with a lot of random effects, there's a sense of regression to the mean. If a situation is worse than average, randomizing it will put it more likely somewhere in the middle, so probably better than it was. If your situation is better than average, randomizing it will put it on average somewhere in the middle. So you probably don't want to do that. So that suggests a strategy for using Scroll of Teleport. If you're in a really bad situation, you use it to get out. Otherwise, except that Rogue has fairly large maps. It's the 80 by 20 grid, and okay, not all of those are spaces. There's rooms within that, but it adds up to hundreds of possible tiles, and there's only usually a few enemies on the level at once. So most of the time, teleporting is actually a pretty safe choice. Some exceptions. Sometimes there's a room full of monsters. Is Vim a roguelike? Maybe. Sorry, I was just looking at the chat. So if you had a game that was more okay, the limited number of enemies might be a technological limitation of the time. I'm not sure completely, but yeah, if you had a roguelike that had like a war happening and the whole level is filled up with hundreds of enemies, then teleporting randomly in that is more likely to be bad than in a sparse dungeon with just a few scattered enemies. And in my own games, I tend to use quite small grids, 6x6, 8x8, even in Broughlio's 4x4. And so similarly to the large grid with a whole army, a small grid with a handful of enemies is denser. There are fewer safe spaces. Teleporting randomly is more likely to be bad. So I like to do some different things to mitigate the randomness, to have a teleport effect not be as risky as it would be to just randomly teleport in this small, dense grid. One option is to just remove the randomization, give you control of your teleport. So NetHack has a ring of teleport control, which does this, more or less. If you choose a space that happens to be in a wall, then it randomly teleports you instead. So you can teleport to a known space, or you can teleport into the unknown with a chance of it being randomized. My game in Broughlio has a blink dagger, which at first randomly teleports you, but as it levels up, it randomly selects 2 possible target spaces and you click the one that you want to move to. So it's not the full ring of teleport control, it's just partially random but partially controlled. And then, yeah, it's currently only on iOS. I'm meaning to release it on PC at some point, but life. And as it levels up, it chooses 3 spaces and then it chooses 4 spaces. So you get more and more control, but never full control. It can still be a risky action. And yeah, giving... This is essentially the same thing as in a card game. You can have an effect draw a card, or you can have effect draw 2 cards and discard 1 of them, right? In a dice game, you can have the effect roll 2 dice and pick the highest. Any random effect can be made a little bit more controlled by having this idea of do it multiple times and pick one. Another possibility is just to reduce the random variance. Like rather than teleport anywhere on the level, you could teleport just in this room or just outside of this room or just in a diagonal line. Any limited rule that you like to think of will make it not necessarily better, because you might be ruling out some of the good spaces that you'd want to possibly want to teleport to, but makes it more predictable, and so it's more likely to be better when you choose to use it. It gives you more information to make it a wise choice. Another possibility I quite like is to, with this and with any random effect, is to give you a chance to respond to the random outcome before anything bad happens. So in the case of teleporting, teleport, but give you another turn after teleporting. So if you teleport into a room full of monsters, you have a chance to act before they all hit you, rather than what could happen, I believe, in Rogue, is if you teleport into a monster room, you could just die the next turn as they all hit you. And you can also simply improve it by adding, say, a heal or some other resource advantage. So in my game 868 Hack, there's an ability Warp, which is basically just a teleport, basically just a random teleport, except it only picks a space that's occupied by an enemy. So instead of the full level, it's, say, 5 or 6 possible targets. So it's much more predictable. So it's much safer to make a decision about when to use it. It also kills that enemy, which is obviously, it makes it a little bit more advantageous. And like all effects in 868 Hack, it's all prog effects, basically the spell effects, it's instantaneous. All but one exception. So it doesn't end your turn, and so you can look at where you've teleported to and decide if you want to do something else there, or maybe teleport again, or yeah, it gives you a chance to respond to it. So it has these 3 ways it's improved above simply a random teleport, and any one of them would make it okay. All 3 of them makes it actually quite a strong spell.
Hey, Michael, I'm just going to give you the heads up. You got 3 minutes, so you can decide if you want to get into this or if you want to answer a couple questions. What are you feeling like?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about this.
All right.
This is like a good
then
item
use
to
your
talk
3
about.
minutes. I will pop in when you're out of time, but use what you got.
Yeah, the last item I want to talk about is the Wand of Polymorph. This is another wand. You point it at an enemy, and it randomly changes its type to another enemy. This is similar to teleport in that it's a random effect that will tend to make a weak enemy stronger. It'll tend to make a strong enemy weaker, but it's not always stronger or weaker. It just changes what abilities the enemy has, what's happening in the game. And I just really love effects like this that just make twist a situation into a different situation, but not a strictly better or worse situation. Sometimes it makes it a better situation. and that's great. And I had something important to say. Probably not that important. Yes. This interacts with anything that depends on the enemy type. So if you're facing a Yeti and all you have is a Wand of Cold and a Wand of Polymorph, and you're thinking, damn, my Wand of Cold won't do anything about this, you can hit it with the Wand of Polymorph, turn it into something else, hit it with the Wand of Cold, which now damages it. And this is a cool combo. I really like these kind of combos. And in Rogue, it's nice that they come up, but they're kind of rare. So in my games, I've kind of honed in on the elements of Rogue that I think are really like my favorite parts, and I try to make those parts expand out and happen more often and be the whole game. So yeah, I have lots of polymorph effects and lots of effects that care about what type of enemy you have. And yeah, so this kind of situation can be more common. And the last thing is in 868 hack, there's a polymorph ability that is much more powerful than the one of polymorph in Rogue, because it hits everything on the screen. But because 868 hack only has 4 different enemy types, like it's not as crazy chaotic as that might seem, because it's fairly predictable. Any one only turns into one of 3 other kinds, and they're all of relatively equal strength. So it's only changing their abilities. It's not changing the strength of the situation. And so because this isn't so wild as it might seem, it's able to be quite cheap in the game.
Hey, Michael. I'm so sorry to have to do this, because this is wonderful. Thank you so much for kicking this off. This has been, between the chat and the Twitter, I could see you're just dropping quotable game design wisdom like mad.
I'd love to catch up on the chat one.
Yes.